Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash at Scoop News Group, and we're here at CyberTalks with Travis Rosiek, Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at BluVector. Travis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Wyatt. Pleasure to be with you today.
Great. Let me start by asking, in your perspective, what does it mean to have a baseline level of cybersecurity in 2021 in light of what so many enterprises have been going through?
Yeah, great question. So maybe starting with a little bit of a historical context of a baseline. So going back to my early days in cybersecurity 2 decades ago, a baseline, there was a couple interpretations of a baseline. One was a secure image or a desktop operating system and applications that were hardened, and that was kind of your baseline, your starting point. It's also kind of like your minimal level of security. So whatever the weakest link in security or, what the bare minimum was. So that was kind of like a historical context of baseline. Fast forward a couple decades into 2021, the problem has gotten a lot more complex, and with the rapid innovation, more features, more functionality, more integration. So, a baseline to me today means also not just the secure configuration, patch levels, things like that, your trusted operating environment, but it's also looking at your supply chain, all of your trust relationships or third-party providers. So all of that becomes part of your baseline, which, is maybe sometimes you have less visibility into that. It makes the problem that much more difficult. So that's what kind of, when I think of security baseline, in today's speak, it really involves much more than my own organizational responsibilities. It also involves third parties as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, easy to underestimate the complexity as well. Next, let me ask, how did you see the pandemic affect the way that organizations are securing their data now?
Yeah, I think the audience and myself had been in tune with the CIA triad in cybersecurity: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I would say, given the response and the flexibility around work from wherever, work from home, work remote, given the pandemic, the 3 pillars became availability, 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 and the security piece around confidentiality and integrity became less important, or, as unfortunately most of the audience knows, security is often added at the end of things or afterward, and it's much more difficult and more costly to do so. So I think, given the dynamics of things that were unpredictable, everyone had to adapt to keep businesses and mission alive. And now we're kind of going back and figuring out, well, how do we go back and harden the environments or the new norm that we've kind of had to adapt remotely. Also, I think visibility was also key. Where are people, what systems exist, where's our key data? So I think visibility became a huge priority, and I think historically it's been a challenge. So I think it's going to be a future focus of investment going forward.
Absolutely. Next, what kinds of changes do you expect to see in the cyber world over the next year or two?
So, so the changes, the ones that keep me up at night is, I think the problem's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't see, I see the adversaries being more adaptive. They don't have rules to follow. The ability to innovate, and now the monetization of it is so enticing that I see this huge potential energy becoming kinetic. So I see the problem getting a lot worse. The cyber defenders and organizations within the government and private sector just don't have the resources or the human capital or the flexibility to adapt as quickly. So unfortunately, I see the problem getting worse. And I think more emphasis on changing the model, right? So time is of the essence. I think organizations, and we're seeing in the news, the reactive approach to cybersecurity just isn't working anymore. The adversaries can adapt and be effective. Relying on compliance to be secure isn't working. Relying solely on signature-based detection, that's not working. So the adversaries are finding ways to be successful and, navigate between the gray space, people, process, and technologies and be successful. So I think that, we have to be more proactive. There has to be a much more sense of urgency to address this. It is a cyber arms race. And, if you read the headlines, we're not in a good place. So we really have some catching up to do. And I think we need some really thought-provoking approaches to, evolutionary leaps here to kind of mitigate this going forward.
Absolutely. And then lastly, Travis, we're asking cybersecurity experts this last question. What's the biggest thing that you think most people don't appreciate or fully understand about cybersecurity?
Oh, so yeah, you ended with the hardest question. That's you could probably write a master's thesis or dissertation on this, and not be complete with the answer. So I think it varies on the industry and your role or responsibility within an organization. I think the as I mentioned before, around the human element of the cyber threat actors, what motivates them. I think there is a huge human element here. It's not just a computer or a piece of malware. So it's really, I think you're really mitigating like a criminal, right? So if you kind of look at it as a bank robber or somebody like that, there is a person behind it or a group of people that are motivated to find your weak gap. And cyber adversaries only have to be right once or get lucky once, where a cyber defender or an organization has to be right every time. And I think that's where, executive leaders in companies and organizations need to start building security into everything that they do, because until we start leveling that playing field or equaling that equation out, it's going to be really easy for the adversaries to kind of find the weaknesses. So, thinking twice about business efficiencies or allowing features or functionality. Really, there are cost trade-offs, and some of those things may be longer, felt in the long term versus the short term. So I think kind of looking at this from a longer term lens will help us be more successful in the short term. And to quote Ben Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And I think that's never been more true in cybersecurity, that, doing some of the basics, going above and beyond compliance, being more proactive in your approach to cybersecurity, even though it might cost a little bit more upfront, is going to be, 5, 10, 100 times less expensive, in the long term.
Interesting, channeling Benjamin Franklin in cybersecurity times. He might have had a role to play there. Thank you for suggesting that. Travis, Rosiek, thank you so much for taking time to join us here at CyberTalks and sharing some of your insights on improving cybersecurity.
Pleasure. Thank you, Wayne.